Guys, I have a song that I'm working on. I wanted to sing it to you. I have a song I'm working on. I want you song is, okay? The song I'm working on, it goes Tartaria, Tartaria. Is my mic still fucked? Okay, I'm going to teach you guys about the history of Iran, the one that I care about, all right? I want to talk about the rise of the Safavids, the rise of the Shia revolution of the early modern period. And this is kind of the origin of my thinking with the revolutionary dynasty and why Shiism, I think, is a very profound outlook. We're going to begin with the Safavi Order. Ardabil is somewhere here. I'm going to explain to you something about the Safavi Order. Safavi Order did not begin as a Shia order. The Safavis were a Sufi order. They were a unique type of Sufi order that was the culmination of the various different like Sufi traditions at the time. But this is after Timur. This is after Tamerlane. So the Mongols came to the region, and then the collapse of the Mongols created a bunch of like fragmentation. Timur basically came, reunifies the region along with the Ottomans. And the Ottoman Empire is here. Okay. They're here. They're all over Anatolia, actually. But over here, okay, if you guys are paying attention, over here in this region, this is northwestern Iran, this is the Caucasus, and this is the eastern parts of Anatolia. There's a lot of instability, okay? This is a frontier. You understand? It's a frontier. So in frontiers, you have a contested territory. You have Iran, Persia, in the aftermath of the Timurid Empire collapsing. Totally fucking fragmented, okay? It's balkanized. You have different principalities. You have different, warlords, basically. The Ottomans are here. They're a more or less centralizing force. And over here, it's just a bunch of warlords in the aftermath of the Timurid period, running around, running shit, okay? So, and these warlords are from primarily Turkic confederations. These are nomads. These are barbaric nomads. Timur's empire was a Turkic steppe nomadic empire, right? Relied on a lot of chiefs, a network of chiefs and tribes united into this big empire. When that collapses, warlords, tribal chiefs, they emerge and they create new confederations, but they're never able to reach the scale of the Timurid Empire. And they're constantly fighting each other and killing each other and attacking each other. And it's just chaos all around. You have Byzantine principalities. You have all these different patchwork of states. And it's a big mess, okay? It's a big mess. Safavi Order, more or less, is a Sufi order that eventually settled in a city. I think it's called Ardabil. I'm probably not pronouncing it right, or I'm saying it the wrong way. Northwestern Iran. Yeah, it's like right on the border of Azerbaijan. The Safavi were unique because they preached a doctrine of spiritual purification through a charismatic leader, but they were also known for, I'm not going to fucking lie, they were a lot like the ACP in a lot of ways. Because they focused on community service, they focused on giving back, they focused on charitable works, and they focused on their own version of party enterprises. They had their own Sufi order enterprises. So they had economic industry. They had a mini city. Ardabil was like a city within a city, right? Within a huge district of the city, it was controlled by the Safavi order. They controlled guilds. They were like craftsmen. They were skilled people when it comes to economics. And they did community service. They were leaders within their city. And they were able to encompass a large regional network of Sufis, right? They were a fucking network. They had a lot of like intel network type of thing. But the Safavi were primarily sedentary. I think the founder of the Safavids was a Kurd. I think these were not Turks. They were sedentary people. Sedentary people. They're urban. They're sedentary. They're settled. And most importantly, they were peaceful. They didn't believe in violence. They didn't believe in politics, really. They believed in focusing on spiritual purification and being a force of good within their community, and within the world in a sense, right? So that was the Safavi order. Safi al-Din is the founder of the order. He had a son. Safi's son became the master of the Safavi order after Safi dies, right? Safi al-Din. So it becomes a dynastic Sufi order where the firstborn son, that's their principles, inherits the position of being the master of the order, right? Who runs everything, who's the master of the order, and so on, right? So it's hereditary. So he has a son, and then that guy lives a full life. He has a son. Okay, that guy, this is the guy we're talking about. He lives a full life, but in the process of setting up an Ardabil, he aligns the Safavi order with a warlord named Jahan Shah. It was a small confederation that had shrunk in size to being regional. The Safavis, because I think Ardabil was within the domain of Jahan Shah, regional warlord, they developed a relationship, okay? The Safavis were wealthy, they had some measure of power, and they were very respected. They were very respected. Like, locals respected them a lot. Communities respected them a lot. They held a lot of prestige when it came to Sufi mysticism. They did a lot of good charity. They were recognized and they were respected, right? So Jahan Shah recognized the Safavi order and vice versa. There is a degree of recognition between them. Although Jahan Shah is a barbarian and whatever, like, that's how it worked. He was the ruler. He knew the politics. He did things by force. The Safavis were mystics, they were ideologists, and they were mainly quietists, okay? Safi's grandson's name was Ibrahim, okay? Ibrahim joined Jahan Shah on campaigns against the Caucasian principalities, the Circassians, and others, right? So they had a close relationship. I mean, this guy and Jahan Shah were pretty tight. And they respected each other, right? But he dies. The guy dies, okay? And his son at the time is very young. His firstborn son is very young. His son was named Junayd, okay? Junayd was the heir of the Safavi order. But Jafar is the brother of Ibrahim and the uncle of Junayd. The heir of the Safavi order, because his father dies, is Junayd. He's the next in line in the succession. His uncle is named Jafar, okay? His uncle is older, is named Jafar. So Jafar takes de facto control of the Safavi order because Junayd is too young. Junayd is too young to rule. So his uncle takes charge. His uncle was named Jafar, okay? Sheikh Jafar. Time passes and Junayd gets older. And eventually Junayd comes of age and he says, okay, it's my time to rule. It's my time to rule the Safavi order because he's of age. But there's a problem, okay? Jahan Shah preferred Sheikh Jafar. They had a special little relationship going on. The backing and power that Jahan Shah bestowed on the Safavi order and the special relationship between Sheikh Jafar and Jahan Shah basically created a situation where worldly politics overrode the extremely esoteric and internal principles of the Sufi Safavi order. So all these mystical internal principles, you can just imagine them cynically casting that aside and going, well, Jafar and Sheikh Jahan's the big dog in charge. So if Jahan says, Jafar should be the next ruler, Jafar is going to be the next ruler. So Jahan handpicked, basically, Jafar to be the next ruler of the Sufi order. So instead of the Sufi order, based on its own, principles, deciding who the next master of the order is going to be based on their spiritual whatever beliefs, you have worldly politics intervening and deciding that. Because the Safavi order became a worldly economic, reality with worldly influence, And so Jahan Shah wanted Jafar to stay in charge. Jafar got comfortable, in power, ruling. Jahan for Jafar. And all you have to know is that they intervened in such a way that internally violated the sacred principles of the order itself. Jahan Shah intervenes to basically handpick and force the selection of the next in line of the Safavi Order. To give you an analogy that should make sense to you, imagine the Safavi Order is a communist party like CPUSA, okay? And we're at a critical juncture in history where we have to have the next in line for the next synthesis of Marxism. What's the next movement? What's the next incarnation of Marxism going to look like, right? But then Joe Biden intervenes and handpicks Joe Sims and Rosanna to be the leaders of the Communist Party. They're not communists. Joe Biden is not a communist. Why should the Democrats have power to decide the future of the Communist Party? Well, because the Democrats have power. So it's the same level of the violation of their principles. The Safavi order, you can believe in this principle or not, doesn't matter. According to their principles, the firstborn son should be the one to become the master of the order. But Jahan Shah basically hijacks, the ways of this order and decides that Jafar should be. So what happens? Well, Junayd loudly attacks everyone and says this is bullshit, this is unjust, this is injustice, this is wrong. I mean, it was wrong. So he was contesting the position. And some people in the order started following Junayd. Because of that, Junayd gets kicked out and exiled outside of the realm of the Safavis and of Jahan Shah's small principality. Junayd is recognized as having been wronged, and he brings with him some followers. Not a lot, though. You have to go, you're going to get killed. Everywhere Junayd goes, this bitch-ass guy, Jahan Shah, just like the way we get blocked internationally, same shit, he's sending letters to everyone saying that they're LaRouchites, they're bigots, they're Nazis. No, I'm just kidding. He sends letters to everybody calling Junayd illegitimate, crazy, a kafir, because he's taking the beliefs to extreme. And everywhere Junayd goes, he's not safe. So he gets arrested at some point and apprehended by one of the local Turkmen chiefs. Okay? He gets seized, okay? Because Jahan Shah is circulating shit talk about Junayd that he's illegitimate, okay? So Junayd gets seized, and what happens is very interesting. Junayd is let go. Why? Because he's talking to these Turkmen, and they're picking up what he's putting down. So this is the point where Mao is going and talking to the peasants, or this is the point where Lenin is going down to the people, or the meeting of Marxism, the Sufi order, and the proletariat. The Turkmen were like proletarians of their time, if you think about it. I could explain why. They were extremely oppressed. They were extremely... You understand something about Turkmen? These were pastoralists. They had sheep. They had cows and stuff. But everywhere they went, they couldn't find grazing land. They weren't welcome anywhere. People kept trying to take taxes from them, tax them hard. And they were just persecuted everywhere they went. They were very poor. They were very, very poor and aggrieved. They lived a very harsh life, Turkmen, okay? Not an easy life, a very brutal, harsh life, where everywhere they, went, they were spit on. They didn't live a dignified life. So these were like people that were basically proletarianized in the equivalent in that world, And Junayd started preaching. This is where Junayd he creates the Sahib Kiran, right? Junayd feels injustice because of what's going on in the internal politics of the Safavi order becoming corrupted. But somehow that manages to resonate with the sense of injustice and aggrievement that the Turkmen tribes feel based on their material conditions. And this accidental mutual recognition creates something very interesting. The Turkmen start following Junayd, and it's like Dune, the movie Dune, right? Where, you know, in the movie Dune, where Paul Atreides, he goes among the freemen. The freemen feel there's an injustice because they're being oppressed. Paul Atreides feels an injustice because his father was killed by the fucking Harkonnens, right? So there's this macrocosm, microcosm, mutual recognition that accidentally happens, an accidental confluence of mutual recognition that creates something very dangerous. Junayd brings with him all of the education, all of the special skills, all of the knowledge, all of the mystical insight, and all of this distinct sense of purpose that came from the urban Safavi order, and he brings it to the countryside, and he's basically uniting that with the sentiments of the Turkmen barbarians. So these two things are starting to meet that don't belong together. The quietest urban sedentary Safavi order is being brought down to meet the Turkmen proletarians where they're at, and they fuse together. Junayd starts to recruit. Not only do the Turkmen tribes let him go, he starts to recruit from them. And he's making cosmic sense of the entire situation through Shiism. Why is he doing it through Shiism? Because the Shia religion says that there is an injustice within Islam at the start. The betrayal of the Prophet's family. That's the beginning of the injustice within the world of Islam. Junayd is not an Arab. The Turkmen are not Arabs. They could care less about the direct bloodline lineage from the Prophet's family on a literal level. They have no connection to that. But what does resonate with them is the story of how there's an internal betrayal of the original principle. That makes sense to them. That they're experiencing a world of injustice and need to make sense of it somehow. And the Shia religion becomes the way that they do that. Through the Shia faith, they become what I like to call authentic Shias. Not clerical Shias who are, getting learned and like the Abbasid style conformist Shiism. This is a Shiism combined with Sufi charisma, with Sufi flexibility and dynamism, but it's also a kind of Iranic Shiism. Why? Because they're connecting Shia principle of betrayal within Islam to the fragmentation, disunity, and injustice of post-Timur Iran. The Ottomans had already consolidated Rome, or they were beginning to, right? The Ottomans already were the Byzantine Empire. They're, that's the future of the Byzantine Empire. But what about Iran? Iran is one of the oldest civilizations on earth. Iran is a world. There's a world called Iran. It's the Persianate world. The Persianate world of Persian myths, Persian principles, Persian ways, civilization, courtly customs, literature, a mythos, a cosmology, an understanding of right versus wrong, and so on. And the Persian world was fragmented. The Timurid Empire was the last time there was a huge Persianate empire. That was gone. So the Persianate world was in disarray. And Junayd's life was in disarray. He was exiled from his own order, and the life of these Turkmens was in disarray because they were persecuted and they experienced immense worldly injustice at the hands of the prevailing powers that be. The fragmentation, the disunity, the constant infighting, the tribal infighting. The way that Junayd makes sense of that, he combines the principles of the Sufi Safavi order with revolutionary Shiism. Just a revolutionary understanding that Ali, the Lion of God, Haydar, the Lion of God, that's the militant revolutionary spirit of we're going to fucking go to war to restore justice on earth. The Prophet's family was betrayed. We are betrayed. The world is betrayed. It's a world of injustice. It's in turmoil. We're going to defy the powers that be, and we're going to go to war for this justice. So how does a quietistic Sufi mystic go from that to being a revolutionary guerrilla leader of a movement? Okay, that's really profound. That's really crazy. Okay, this guy's a Sufi quietistic mystic who does this, okay? So he basically starts to raise an army. I'm skipping a lot of details. He spent some time in Syria where he was allowed to have a castle for a period of time. Skipping a lot of details. Over time, Junayd eventually makes an alliance with, I think it was the Ak Koynulu with Uzu Hassan. I don't remember. He enters a marriage. Okay, he marries the daughter of a very powerful enemy of Jahan Shah's. The leader of an opposing tribal Turkmen confederation. Junayd is now connected, and he's very powerful. He has an entire army that's devoted to him, devoted to this world historical cause, and it's a revolutionary movement at this point, right? He is preaching a message of changing the world, that the world of Iran, the Iranic world, which is the world proper for these people, is in disarray and needs to be restored, okay? And so, time passes, yada, yada, yada. Time passes. Junayd goes back to home. He goes back home. And he's thinking, well, now I'm going to be respected. He's not. Jahan Shah and Jafar basically once again, try to kill him and exile him. So Junayd has to go north to the Caucasus. Okay, he goes north to the Caucasus. And when he goes north to the Caucasus, he enters the domain of a different ruler. Originally, he was welcomed. He was seeking refuge north. He had to break the blockade of Jahan Shah and the Safavi, whatever. He had to break that blockade, so he went north. Originally, he was welcomed. He fought against some of the Caucasians, the Circassians. We can only imagine there was some kind of dispute. It's just the frontier politics of the world that they were living in, right? This guy, Jahan Shah, sends another one of his eunuch bitch-ass letters to the ruler of that principality, saying, Junayd is illegitimate, kill him. Now, from that point on, Junayd is trying to set up camp up north to hold out for the winter, to march back on, to reclaim what's rightfully his, right? But Jahan Shah sends a letter, basically shit-talking Junayd, and they make some kind of deal, and Junayd is killed. They're routed, their camp is invaded by the army of this guy who runs the warlord who runs that territory up north, and he's slaughtered. Junayd had a son named Haydar. Haydar fled back, or I think he wasn't there already. He was already there with his mother's family, right? Who came from a more powerful Turkmen confederation. Haydar continues Junayd's mission. He recruits more among the Turkmen. But not only does he do that, he creates what is known today as the Kizilbash. So Junayd set the foundations. Haydar turns it into a disciplined, real army, like a really powerful army. That's the Kizilbash. Under Haydar, they started wearing the red hats, and they're locked the fuck in, and they're ready to go. And they spent a long time fighting. I'm skipping a lot of details. They spent a long time fighting. Now, Haydar's son, this is the final part. They were fighting the world. They were fighting the Ottomans. They were fighting Byzantine leftovers. They were fucking fighting everybody, okay? Now, Haydar spends his whole life fighting this revolutionary war. He also dies. Haydar dies. Now, who is Haydar's son? Haydar's son is none other than Ismail, the founder of the Safavid Empire. Ismail finally continues what Haydar was doing. It was continuity. At that point, the Kizilbash started really fucking rampaging through post-Timurid Iran. Conquest after conquest. The city finally decisively that they seized was exactly the one that Junayd was trying to seize originally up north to set up a principality. They seized it. That was the door, the entrance into Persia. The Qizilbash conquers all of Persia and reunifies it for the first time. That was the revival, not Ardabil, the other one. That was the revival of Iran. Iran had been a dormant, dead nation for a long time, maybe 1,000 years. For the first time, the mythos of Iran, the world of Iran, is restored. They see themselves as the restorers of Iran. That's what the Safavid Empire was. When Ismail takes power in Iran, they don't have institutions. They don't have laws. They don't have time to make their own laws either. So they import Jafari school, traditional Orthodox, 12er Shia scholars to basically standardize 12er normal Shiism and discard all the eccentric heterodox stuff. And that's how Iran gets converted into Shia. But the reason why Iran is different from other places where Shia, predominate is because they have that Qizilbash Safavi legacy, which they might have tried to forget in some ways, but was that the foundation of that unified civilization state, which we call the Safavids, but that's the beginning. And it was kind of repressed into the form of the monarchy. And the kind of spiritual side was ignored. The rise of a very orthodox form of clerical Shia Islam took charge, And the Safavis were forgotten. The special doctrines of the Qizilbash, the Safavis, that's gone. But what makes people defy the U.S. empire today? Well, I'm going to speculate on something. I think that the legacy that is responsible for Hezbollah and for the Islamic Republic and for the axis of resistance probably comes from this story. Like, the Sahib Kiran of, connecting the story of Hussein with Palestine, that's coming from this legacy of being able to connect worldly injustice to the belief of the Shias about what happened to Islam, right? But that wasn't really normal for this history of Shias for the most part. It's really this story of Junayd and the Safavi Order and the Qizilbash that makes Shiism the revolutionary thing we know it as today, right? So the heirs of this movement, it's Hezbollah, it's the Islamic Republic. Anyway, guys, that's the lecture. I just wanted to give you guys a brief overview. I know that the resistance forces do not subscribe to this history at all. I do, though. That's what I do, though. Met, what's up? I'm not saying they do. I'm saying that I do, okay? I'm my own man, okay? I'm allowed to draw my own conclusions about things, and this is the conclusion I draw. The reason I want to give you this lecture in the first place is because I want you to understand what about that was the end of history. What about that was the end of history? Usually, the nomadic revolution happens from the periphery. Genghis Khan, Tamerlane, the prophet of Islam. What do all these people have in common? Probably Moses as well. What do they all have in common? All these people were born in the wilderness. They were born from tribes. They were born from the tribal world. They became heroes that liberated sedentary peoples. Junayd was a privileged, with a silver spoon. He comes from an urban, educated, sedentary background, and he becomes the leader of this. Just like Mao and Lenin began with books. And that's what Kojev talks about, or Hegel might talk about, as the recognition between the philosopher and the universal statesman. Hegel and Napoleon, Kojev and Stalin, the mutual recognition between the philosopher and the worldly power, right? Somehow, we have the rise of the philosopher king who combines both. That's Junayd. That's what Lenin was, that's what Mao was, and so on and so on. It's like after Tamerlane, the last step nomadic conqueror, we're now having a convergence where the process of the barbaric civilized dialectic is kind of over. And now the struggle is within civilization itself. And it's like this simultaneously unity of the sedentary and the nomadic. Like there's a recognition between these two forces, and civilization now becomes strong enough and powerful enough to influence the barbarians themselves. And that's kind of where we're at here. Our barbarians presuppose the foundation of civilization, just like the Turkmen nomads presuppose the foundation of the educated institution that was in Armadil that made Junayd possible. Junayd came from within the walls, not outside the walls. Do you understand? It's an incredible story. Like, being able to fucking muster up the lion within, you know, to fight. That's a lot of courage. Crossing that boundary of those worlds from growing up in a peaceful Sufi order to going to the wilderness and mustering the courage to go to war. Anyway, guys, that's it for tonight's lecture. I'll see you guys Tuesday. Bye-bye.